अब दहर में वे यारो मददगार नहीं हम, पहले की तरह बेकसोलाजार नहीं हम।
I wish to inform you that the armed forces have moved in as a last resort.
Much more political space for women's issues has been won by the women's movement in the past decade in Pakistan than ever before.
The Musharraf administration increased the number of seats for women in parliament to 33% and passed the Women's Protection Bill in 2006, which finally differentiated between rape and adultery.
Musharraf took a number of measures which are true, but a lot of them came, have behind them protests and campaigns of years. Women's representation was a campaign of over 10 years.
One of them was the National Commission on the Status of Women. That was a demand from the Commission in 1976 that there should be a permanent commission.
It's supposed to be an autonomous statutory body, just sort of as a watchdog with a mandate to oversee, to recommend laws at the policy level and its implementation.
He did it instantly for his own image, with no preparatory work and with poor terms of reference. So we have a National Commission on the Status of Women, which is very poorly or not resourced, whose terms of reference are inadequate, whose powers are not sufficient to really make it the kind of watchdog body that we would want.
We did not always get what we wanted. We were saying that there should be 33% across the board female seats. He only gets 17% to the National Assembly and none to the Senate, 17%.
He made a very strong statement saying that he was going to repeal the blasphemy law, or at least change the procedures of registration of cases under the blasphemy law, which would have made it slightly more difficult for the mullah faction to just I don't like your face, so I'm going to accuse you of blasphemy, that sort of thing.
Our agitation on hudud ordinances finally led to the promulgation of the Women's Protection Bill, which took away rape out of the framework of religion to a crime under the Pakistan Penal Code, which means that that whole requirement of 4 eyewitnesses is no longer now applicable.
This is the same man who has gone to another country and said women in Pakistan, he insulted the women in Pakistan by saying they get themselves raped or they cry rape because they want to get visas and other benefits from other countries. So I can't believe that this man had any goodwill.
So you have partly something, but done, as I said, very much with a view to, I think, international public image, which he kept talking about, Pakistan's image all the time, not the reality that needs to change.
We haven't managed a repeal of the hudud, but the teeth have gone out of that law. And the way women were victimized under it has been reduced.
A lot of women have not only been released, the number of women who now would be charged under the Zina ordinance and land up in jail has substantially reduced.
In recent years, far more insidious and threatening to the rights of women has been the steady rise in militant extremism in the country, which many feel is a result of the state's tolerance of right-wing ideology and parallel justice systems.
He indirectly supported the religious political parties not only in NWFP but also in the Sindh. And the madrasa culture increases greatly during the Musharraf periods.
We must not have parallel judicial systems, but then we need to improve our justice system. We need to ensure that the justice system in this country delivers for all. Otherwise, we will continue, and who's going to these jirgas? The poor people, and who's on the jirga? The influential, the powerful. So naturally, it's not going to deliver justice.
He encouraged MMA. You know very well that MMA, how MMA being formed and how it has been elected to give the MWFP government. Same way in the Sindh, he appointed Arbab Ghulam Rahim as the Chief Justice of Sindh. Arbab Ghulam Rahim has a long history of affiliation with the religious parties. He increased a lot of religiosity in the third area, which most of Dalit Hindu population is living there. Now the girls has been sold there. Hindu girls has been abducted and forcefully converted.
If we say that in this country nothing is going to, and the constitution says that nothing is going to be against Islam, then do we need these parallel courts? I don't understand. The Supreme Court should be enough, the other courts, and then we have to make them deliver justice for all and not just for a few. You know.
Jirka is earning money. Karokari is a business now. You can kill your sister and name anyone in the street as a Karo, and you would get 4 to 10 lakh rupees of nothing.
Jirgas and panchayats and masalihati anjumans and the Taliban's version of what the law should be and what Sharia should be, the Nizam-e-Adl Sharia regulation that the Awami National Party has signed on and is still avowing after all the military operations are being gone and done, is still saying out loud that we vow to implement the Sharia Nizam-e-Adl in Malakand. My goodness, these are supposed to be progressive secular parties, the People's Party, the Awami National Party. It's sickening to hear this kind of thing and to watch this going on since last year, in fact.
Militant campaigns in the northern parts of the country denounced girls' education as un-Islamic, banned contraceptives, attacked health workers, NGOs, tailors, music and CD shop owners, forced women to don veils, and to date has seen at least 230 girls' schools burnt down.
I am proud of the fact that the women's movement in Pakistan has been in the vanguard of all movements.
Women have broken their silence. They are raising issues at every level. Look at the environment movement, or look at human rights, or women's rights, or peace movement. You'll find women active everywhere, and most of the time leading the movements.
Peace with India has been a central plank of the women's movement. Peace with Bangladesh in honor and dignity and respect has been a central plank of the Pakistan women's movement. For example, the government of Pakistan, successive governments since 1971 have not acceded to the demand for an apology and reparation for all the wrongs done to the Bengalis before and during the operation, the army operation, which of course then ended in the separation of the two countries and the creation of the state of Bangladesh. But the women's movement has apologized to the women of Bangladesh for all the rapes and the atrocities that were committed by the Pakistan army. The women's movement has been an intrinsic, inherent, very vocal and very active part of the lawyers' movement. I don't like to call it the lawyers' movement because it's a civil society and lawyers' movement, so let us call it the lawyers and civil society movement for the restoration of an independent judiciary and the Chief Justice of Pakistan.
Contradicting his apparently progressive stance on women, Musharraf came under fire from all quarters for his treatment of women during the lawyers' movement, where many women activists were brutally beaten and jailed. On the other hand, many people feel that women shouldn't be taken to the streets in the first place.
Actually, you could never bring change through peaceful means. Somebody yells, somebody speaks, somebody screams, and we can look at every movement. No matter how much you may have talked to Musharraf, until you were on the streets, nothing happened.
We would not have been where we are today. Even where we are today, we would not have been if protests hadn't started at that time. I think that it is those protests which triggered a movement and created the space for issues on women's rights to become a part of the public discourse.
In fact, I would like to say that civil society in Pakistan, which is so Pakistan as a country is so militarized. Civil society protests are always peaceful. Nobody carries a gun, nobody even carries a danda.
If you write a letter to the editor, it's just you. If you come out as 100 people, at least you have 100 who are saying the same thing. I have no patience with this sort of thing of why do people protest? Why did people come on the streets for Pakistan? These very people who say women should not had no problem with the women coming out in the Muslim League movement.
The reality is that women's rights became a priority on the agenda of every political party in this country. You start with the 1988 elections, and following that, any elections that have taken place in Pakistan, every manifesto has a program on women's rights. Even the Jamaat-e-Islami has a program on women's rights. Their notion of what women's rights mean may be very different. So it has become a politically indispensable commitment.
People feel that women shouldn't be making demands on the streets or coming out, but they don't realize that coming on the streets is the last option always.
In the case of honor killing, persistent lobbying did result in a bill in 2004, but was termed an eyewash by rights activists for its shortcomings.
Under the pressure and raising this issue, it becomes such a public nuisance and shame that laws are passed, but they're always short of what we want and what we've been asking for.
Honor killing is a part of the Pakistan Penal Code that has to do with the whole concept of qisas and diyat.
Because of the qisas and diyat law, which gives the offender the right to be bought out or be pardoned, the family pardons the offender who's a member of the family. So justice is not delivered.
It's a farce. That bill is a farce. It does nothing for stopping so-called honor killings.
Now our big campaign is to get the qisas and diyat law changed so that compoundability in the honor killing law is removed.
President Zardari's cabinet contains the Muslim world's first female Speaker of Parliament, along with several other top female politicians. But except for those in the general seats, they are not directly elected but nominated by their parties, allowing male ministers to handpick the female delegates that best suit them.
The women who have come from these parties one shouldn't assume that they are feminists. We hope that at some point they will be very conscious of themselves as women and will see it as a women's issue. And actually we have had processes where it has made a difference. But many of them, the majority, would not be at that level of consciousness. They've come as party members and not necessarily as women's rights activists.
So I feel that the first step that we took jointly, collectively, was to form a women's parliamentary caucus. And I give it to the Speaker, National Assembly, that she led this process. We all supported her, and we've got a forum where women can come across party lines on critical issues.
Most of these issues center on laws that women have been lobbying for since decades, such as the Bill on Domestic Violence and the Sexual Harassment Bill, which are yet to be formalized. These too are being heavily criticized for their flaws.
As far as the domestic violence bill, there's been a major problem in it.
Section 25 says that if the claim turns out to be false, then the victims or the women who brought this claim can be punished certain amount or 6 months jail.
It will have the adverse effect, in fact the reverse effect, of preventing women from going to the police and registering cases of domestic violence, because they'll be scared that if they're unable to prove it, the burden of proof is placed on the complainant, which is the woman, rather than the perpetrator, who happens to be the man.
This is a process. At least what the bill recognizes is that domestic violence is a crime. Once we get into the implementation of the bill, other weaknesses might also be highlighted and we might have to do some amendments. But getting the bill on the agenda is a major step forward, I feel.
Though the NGO movement has made the government's job easier, with ever-rising rates of crime against women, many feel that change in women's status and perception must be led by the state via progressive policies and uncompromised legislation.
The state's responsibility now to turn things around, because if we continue, we would need major changes in the Constitution. We would need major changes in our curriculum. We would need major changes in our policies.
It will not benefit us to have an isolated law here and an isolated law there. Secondly, on violence against women, one law doesn't work. You can have the Women's Protection Bill over here, you can have the domestic violence bill that is coming over here, but unless you have a well thought out, synchronized, coordinated protection system in place, violence against women will not be done away with.
At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the state, because civil society can't replace state. Yes, what civil society can do is that we can create models, best practices.
There is no judiciary is not working properly, police is not working properly. So what I can say that civil societies are think that they are chained. They can't change much.
Unfortunately, no one is listening because no one is committed to women's issues and women's rights.
We've got a democratic government, and 1.5 years has passed and we still don't have a minister of women's development.
We were against Mr. Zehri being made a federal minister because he defended the burying alive of 8 women in Balochistan, and I say 8, not 5. He defended it as culture and tradition.
Sometimes they said you buried the woman in Balochistan and say it is our culture. And you flag the women in Sawat and you say it is our religion.
The appointment of the federal minister, Mir Hazar Khan Bijrani, as the federal education minister, he, if you will recall, has actually chaired jirgas where little girls have been given away in compensation as Badle Sola in intertribal warfare and feuds.
We need to separate religion from the state. That is why we have Gojra happening here, because we've allowed extremism.
Women need to be protected. How? Not by pushing them into the 4 walls of their homes, but by giving them empowerment, by giving them more space, by enhancing their political participation, their public participation.
Our immediate concerns are legislation on inheritance in the sense of criminalizing it if a woman doesn't get it, in land rights for women, in tenancy rights for women.
Where is the commitment? Where is the repeal of the Hudud ordinances? Where is the repeal of Qanuni Shahadat and Qisas and Diyat and blasphemy? These things need to be done. If they are in the manifesto, then they need to be done. And until they are done, the women's movement has its work cut out for it.
Yes, much needs to be done, but it is equally important to look back and recognize how much has already been accomplished.
I think the biggest success has been to break the silence. It is the first time in Balochistan that you are actually having a debate. And to me, that's a huge accomplishment. I mean, the women's lives have gone, they've been sacrificed, but at least their sacrifice has not been in vain to me if the Baloch themselves have begun to question. And you have several Baloch voices which have come up to say, this is not our culture. We do not accept this.
As we said in our book, this constant 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You go up forward, you create a space, and there's a slide back. But in the end, I think if you look at a sum total, I think we're moving forward.
I wish that the women's movement had been able to get even more rights for women in Pakistan. But I think we would not even have been able to step onto the first rung of the ladder if the women's movement had not been there.
Similarly, the women's movement or movement for rights cannot at any point say, we have arrived, because the principle of it will have to be addressed in the next issue that comes up.
I do look forward to having much younger women come forward and articulate a new phase of the movement, and that would be my wish.
The women's movement has traversed a challenging and arduous path, full of trials and personal sacrifice to get where it is today. Each and every woman who raised her voice against injustice carried the movement just a step closer to a better tomorrow for the women of Pakistan.
अब दहर में भी यारो मददगार नहीं हूँ, पहले की तरह बेकसो लाचार नहीं